So welcome to this second Facebook Live about the inner critic. And today we're going to work with awareness a bit more, inquiring what your inner critic is like. So if you haven't seen the previous Facebook Live, check it out because there's an inquiry there that leads to this. So what is your sense of your inner critic? What do they criticize you for? Is it for the way you look? Shape of your body, or maybe it's one particular feature that it criticizes you for, or is it for what you do? So for other people it can be more around what they do. That's more true for me, around work and the way you perform. So mine is that I have to be like perfect. I have to get it totally right. So even making this Facebook Live is a total challenge for me because my critic is watching what I do and spotting for things that aren't right. And it can be distracting and off-putting. It might be that your critic comes out in your relationship, has a go at you for being a bad partner. Or a really common one is within personal development or spiritual work. So your critic really slams into you for your meditation, that you're not aware enough, or that you're not kind enough, or that you're not growing in the particular way that you should be growing. And our critic kind of learns about this. Whatever your critic criticizes you for, it kind of develops and grows as you grow. As you develop skills and knowledge, the inner critic has access to those. So as you gain more awareness through doing things like meditation practice, the inner critic can use that to spot more things that are wrong with you. They can use things that you've learned about psychology or therapy. So there's more and more potential for things to criticize. And each time you develop and grow a little bit more, the critic develops and grows a bit more. So it can be a kind of never-ending path where you're always developing a bit more, and then your critic is still criticizing you, and then you've got to grow more, and then they get those skills. And when does your critic criticize? That's another interesting thing. What situations in your life does your critic come in? So it may be in your work or in particular relationships. It's common that there's particular people who'll trigger your critic, or that your critic comes out when you're taking a step forward. Like when you're doing something that you really want to do, when you're really putting yourself out there, it's quite common, because that feels really vulnerable, that the critic will come in at that point. So also noticing when the critic is showing up, the different circumstances. So the critic, you may have noticed that like the flavor of the critic is it lets you know what's wrong. And it is an authority on what is wrong with you, with what you do, with everything in your life. That's his job. And it kind of comes in with a sort of authority, or almost godlike way of being. So there's this never-ending criticism, comparison with the people around you. And it can even go in both directions. So your critic might criticize you for being too meek and small. And then when you put yourself out there, your critic could turn around and say, well, you're too arrogant and expressive. So whatever you do, whatever you learn, however you develop, the critic remains there active. And that is why it is so crucial to do this piece of work, to work with this part. And if you did absolutely nothing else in your personal development at all, if you changed your relationship, if you found freedom from the inner critic, it would change your life so profoundly. So there may be some people watching who don't have a sense of critic. Like, it's like you looked for it and maybe you even did the inquiry from last time. You kind of can't see that it's there, but there's still shame. So one thing that can happen is if you have a primary identity associated with being a good mother or being very spiritual, which is something that I really did, it's like I couldn't even see criticism in me. I couldn't see my self-criticism because it was so not allowed. So that's one thing that can happen. The other thing that can happen is that you can, if you perform a lot in your life, if you're a very successful person, you can end up following the advice of your critic. And your critic kind of becomes like an inner coach that's egging you on to keep on pushing and keep on doing and keep on succeeding. And while you're doing that, the actual volume of the critic can be quite low because in a way you're following its steps. So that can be another way that the critic isn't so visible. And the other way that the critic hides, which is a really good one, is to be outwardly critical. So even as you consider these inquiries, it might be that the direction of your criticism for some people is focused outwards. So you end up criticizing people around you. And what I would say is, if that's the case, go beneath that, because if that's your pattern, for sure, there will be some self-criticism hidden. So what we're doing here is we're building up a sense, we're getting to know our critic, we're building an awareness of it. And even a sense of, if your critic was beside you, what would they be like? Would they be in a man's body, a woman's body? What would their posture be like? What would their tone of voice be like? So see if you can build up almost like a caricature of your critic, like a sense of what that character might be like. So that is the step for this Facebook Live, and we'll be doing more with that in the next live that I do. And just to say, this can feel super uncomfortable, right? Because it's kind of yucky looking at the ways that we're unkind to ourselves. So in the next Facebook Live, I'm going to bring something to kind of balance this out, this process of inquiry, which will help to build that awareness and also stay centered. So I hope that's been useful. And I'll put the link to the next live after this in the writing by this one.